Welcome to Mom and Mind, a podcast about maternal mental health from conception to pregnancy and postpartum. Real stories from moms and family members who have made it from struggling to wellness, and interviews with experts and advocates who work for moms and families to get the help they need. We discuss very real struggles that can sometimes be hard to hear, but these are stories that need to be told so that moms and families can know that healing is possible. This podcast is meant to offer information and awareness and is not a replacement for treatment by a professional. Thank you for being with us today.
Welcome to Mom and Mind. I'm your host, Dr. Kat. In this episode, we will be talking with Rachel Rabinor about infertility struggles and the potential impact on mental health for mothers. We will talk a little bit about the types of infertility, as well as some of the options available to assist in becoming pregnant and having a baby. With our conversation today, we really want women, partners, and families to know that they're not alone, that there is support available for them, and hopefully to continue to reduce the stigma and sometimes the shame that comes with infertility struggles. So a little bit about Rachel Rabinor. She's a psychotherapist and licensed clinical social worker. She has a private practice in San Diego, California, where she specializes in maternal mental health. She also provides trainings to birth workers, including doulas, nannies, lactation consultants, midwives, and other allied professionals. Rachel serves on the board of San Diego's Postpartum Health Alliance, where she co-chairs their outreach efforts. Their current work focuses on training prenatal birth providers on the risks, signs, and symptoms of developing perinatal mood and anxiety disorders so that they can help prepare their clients for the adjustment to motherhood and decrease the likelihood of developing a perinatal mood or anxiety disorder. Rachel started her career in New York City working at a pregnancy prevention program. After many years in prevention, she began working with pregnant and parenting teens and their families in San Diego. After giving birth to her first child, she knew that someday she would start a private practice serving all women transitioning to motherhood. What she didn't know at that time was how her own subsequent journey through secondary infertility would shape her future practice. Rachel is a member of Resolve, the National Infertility Association, and is in the process of starting an open, supportive, and judgment-free group in San Diego for those struggling with primary or secondary infertility. Thank you so much for being here, Rachel. We're so happy to have you.
Thanks for having me today, Kat.
Yeah, this is great. I'm so happy to have you on here to talk about infertility. You know, in terms of maternal mental health stuff, things that happen for moms during the reproductive period, infertility is a really, really hard thing to talk about for a lot of moms and a lot of people. There's a lot of feelings that come up around these kinds of struggles. So I'm really glad you're going to share some information with us today.
It's true. You know, Kat, infertility is one of those things that really isn't talked a lot about. And so I'm really happy to be here and to talk more about it.
Yeah, great. And I mentioned in your bio that you had your own journey through secondary infertility and that has shaped where you've gone with your own work. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So when my son was born in 2010, without a hitch, thought I'd get pregnant, textbook birth, home birth. Really, it was what I had imagined that motherhood should be. And then I went on to have 3 recurrent miscarriages in a 12-month period, which really blew me out of the water. I just really did not see that this was going to be the course that my life would take. The expectation for easy birth was set high after my first child, and it was a huge, huge challenge, really devastating for both my husband and I.
Right, absolutely. And I think that's the feeling that comes for a lot of women when they're going through infertility struggles, is that devastating, that grief that comes up around loss.
Yes, yeah. There's so much loss. You know, I know we're going to talk a little bit more about it, but there's really, even going through secondary infertility, there are different losses than primary infertility. But loss is something that really permeates all women and men who are struggling with infertility.
Right, absolutely. So how did your experience kind of shape how you went into the work?
For one, I feel much more aware of the reality that infertility affects 1 in 8 couples in the United States. Almost 10% of the population are dealing with this, which is something I was pretty ignorant about prior to my own experience.
That's a lot.
And it's a lot. It's a lot of people, you know, and it doesn't discriminate against ethnicity, religion, your racial background. You know, someone that you know is likely struggling, and maybe it's you. So I became much more empathic, that's for sure. Never assuming that somebody wasn't having a child by choice, or never asking a woman, when are you going to have your second child, being much more cognizant of the fact that people all around us are likely struggling, and you never know who it is because it's silent, it's invisible, and people don't talk about it freely.
Right. So you were already in the field, and it sounds like a lot of us who've had an experience weren't given much information about how infertility and secondary infertility impact mom's mental health or family's mental health.
No. I was working with teens when I experienced my own infertility, and there are some risk factors for teens, and infertility isn't typically one of them. So I did have some clients occasionally who would experience a miscarriage, but it was definitely not as prevalent as the 1 in 8 that exists in the larger society. So no, I didn't receive any specific training around infertility, but it did cause me to go and seek more additional training around maternal mental health and infertility. Yeah.
Right. So for people who are listening, maybe there are some folks who know a lot about this already, infertility and what that is, but certainly there may be some people who are just finding out about it. Can you give some sense of what the difference is between, we talked about primary infertility and secondary infertility, and what that means?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great question. So infertility is the inability to conceive or carry a pregnancy to term after 1 year of trying to conceive, or the inability to carry a pregnancy to live birth. So if you're over the age of 35, the time of trying to conceive is reduced to 6 months. The added piece with secondary infertility is the inability to become pregnant or to carry a pregnancy to term following the birth of one or more biological children. So that birth also would have been conceived without the assistance of any reproductive technologies or fertility medication. So that's the difference between the two.
Yeah. So in order for people to get the information about infertility, they're not finding out just anywhere. They have to really look it up and go seek out these answers.
It's true. You really hit the nail on the head, because my own personal experience was exactly that. I can distinctly remember I was at my job. I was in our little communal room, and I was chatting with one of my colleagues who I was fairly close with, and she knew I'd had at least one miscarriage at that time. And she shared with me that her sister, as she said, also struggled with secondary infertility. And I thought, what? What is that you just said? Okay. I had no idea it had a name. And so that's sort of how I became aware that secondary infertility was actually a thing. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, I hit Dr. Google and learned everything that I thought I needed to know. And it was intense.
Right. Right. Well, other than hitting up the internet, where would we learn about this stuff? Where should we be learning about this stuff?
Thank goodness there's a podcast like this, really. I mean, even while I was dealing with my secondary infertility, I tried to talk about it at the park where my child was playing, and be really open and reduce the stigma around it. But it's hard. It's hard for people to listen to. So yeah, and then after I had my second child, still people love to ask me, how's that age gap? And so that's always a conversation. It never goes away, right? My secondary infertility never goes away. And I do gauge, of course, whether they really want to know or whether I'm just going to take this opportunity and tell them.
Let me just tell you what's really going on.
Yeah. Yes. You were asking, so where should people learn about this, right? And I think the real answer is from our friends, from our community, from the people that we're close with that can say, my friend experienced this, or I've heard of this, but it takes a level of comfort for people to really share what they're experiencing also.
Right. So maybe that is a good intro into the impacts that infertility has on our mental well-being, because I think on some level what we're alluding to is this shame and guilt that comes along, among other things. So what do you think are the main impacts on mental health for the mom and for the family, the partner, all the people who are involved? How does this affect them?
Yeah, that's a really big, important question, because each person, each couple is different. And how they interpret their own experiences and how they process their experience is different. But some of the common ways that people are impacted emotionally are the loss. That would be one of the biggest ways that people experience infertility. There's losses of pregnancy and the birth experience if they haven't had that and they are just wanting that. The potential loss of a genetic link, the loss of the parenting experience, the loss of a grandparent relationship. So thinking about your parents and thinking about what you had yearned for them in a certain stage of their life. You may feel that they're ready for that relationship. Your loss of stability in your own family, because as people going through infertility know, it can really take over so much of your thinking and your actions and just your everyday life.
Yeah.
The loss of your work productivity, loss of a sense of spirituality. People who have a really strong connection with spirituality may start to question higher power and how this is happening and why this is happening. So along with loss comes grief sometimes. And not everyone is really aware of what those symptoms look like. And it's good to be aware of how it might show up. Things like lack of energy, headaches, irritability, sadness, your inability to concentrate, maybe even insomnia. These are all symptoms of grief that people may experience while figuring out and coping with these different losses.
Thank you for highlighting that. And it's so important because, I wonder, having not gone through infertility myself, I wonder how hard it must be to figure out what is going on after a loss, or, should I be feeling these things? What does this mean? Also, they're going through hormonal changes too, without getting into the science and stuff like that. But there's quite a lot going on.
Yeah.
So this is really good for people who are listening, or for people who love someone who's dealing with this or maybe dealing with this, to be looking out for these symptoms of grief and loss.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. Yeah.
Sure.
So what are the other things that a mom might be feeling or a family member might be feeling?
So denial, maybe shock or numbness, like kind of thinking this can't really be happening, or this, hope of next month that we're going to be successful. And that might really change over from that feeling of being successful to feeling anger and maybe even guilt. And so that's something. Anger is, as I just said, another emotion that people deal with, feeling really vulnerable and helpless, maybe both.
Yeah.
Feeling that you don't have a lot of control over your life or your body, your future. Previously you might have been really experienced, professional, had a lot of success. When you work towards something that you want, you achieve it. And here's something that you want desperately, and you feel really powerless. And that can make people feel vulnerable and helpless, like I said, and maybe angry.
Sure, absolutely. So these things that are at this point, they're realizing that they can no longer, whether it's primary or secondary infertility, realizing that they can't control the outcome or predict what's going to happen, and really coming.
Yeah, I know for myself, feeling this intense frustration, wanting to provide sadness and frustration, wanting to provide a sibling for my child. And, in my head, I had this age spacing that I thought that I would strive for, and being unable to carry that out and unknowing whether I would be able to have another child for myself and for my family. Yeah.
Okay. There's just a lot of kind of recalibrating and refiguring out all of the things that you specifically, but also people who are dealing with this, what they imagined their life would look like, and not knowing what it's going to look like in the future.
Yes. The unknown, right? Most of us really like, this society sort of breeds us to have a plan for the most part. And if you've made a plan, if you've gone to college, if you've decided that you want to have a family, if that's your plan, whatever your plan may be, once you have an expectation of that, you're being set up for a disappointment if it doesn't go as planned.
That's so true. And I'm glad you bring up the societal pressures, because that just is really high. So I'm thinking specifically in terms of the societal pressures for moms who are told things like, oh, well, you were only 2 weeks along, or it was only 8 weeks, or you already have a child, or the moms who do feel like it can say something are often kind of maybe outrightly dismissed, but certainly, sometimes made to feel like their concerns or their experience shouldn't bother them.
Right. Yeah, that is really one of the hardest things that people struggle with, is how to navigate society, how to tell people what you're experiencing and get the kind of support that would be beneficial. Because hearing those things, I alluded to it a little bit earlier about people who have a very strong sense of spirituality and trust and faith in a higher power, they often really can start to question that, especially when you hear people saying things like, oh, well, I'm sure that's how God wanted it to be, or now you have an angel watching over you. These statements can be very hurtful because when you're going through a loss, whether it's a miscarriage or infertility, and it's just not going to the plan that you have imagined for your family, these aren't comforts. These are not comforting things to hear. So, yeah.
Right. And it can often be hard for moms to say, too, that, actually, that's not helpful, or you're hurting my feelings. We are often in a position of just having to kind of take what people say sometimes, which is also disempowering.
Oh, yeah.
If you don't have a way to say, like, hey, actually, that's not cool. Please don't say that. Or to be able to know what you do need can be hard too from people. So in terms of, there's so many, I think, topics that we could discuss within infertility, moms who are coming up against maybe either being diagnosed with infertility or secondary infertility or wondering if they have it or not, are then on to thinking oftentimes, what are my options? What can I do? What are the things that could help me have a child that I want to have? So let's talk a little bit more about the depth of feelings and emotions and things that might be coming up for the moms who are dealing with this.
Yeah. I see a lot of women who are struggling with the guilt and some shame around their infertility, the feeling that you're a failure, that this is something that in some way your body has failed you, you're failing your partner, your parents, siblings, other people who are anticipating this child. This kind of goes really deep into how you begin to function in the world then, right? And how you're perceiving yourself as a failure. And it can be a real challenge for moms to increase their self-esteem and to start to feel positive about life in general, let alone the possibility of having a child.
Right. Wow, that is pretty deep. And I think maybe we touched a little bit on maybe there's not a space for them to be talking about this. Maybe this is being held just internally and no one's really understanding the depth of a mom's experience.
Yeah, it's a very private experience for many people. A lot of men and women, I would say men in particular, really suffer in silence, but both men and women. A lot of silence here around infertility. And this can lead to depression, right? Being so isolated and month after month of waiting and hoping.
Sure. And anxiety as well. Every time, maybe just thinking of the mom who's trying to get pregnant and, checking the pee sticks and checking whatever's on the calendar. When can I, any dates or just anticipating, what's to come or hoping.
Yes. And feeling anxious once you are pregnant, right? About losing the pregnancy, about what may or may not happen. All kinds of opportunities, unfortunately, to feel a lot of anxiety through the process of discovering that you're dealing with infertility. There's such a battery of tests that men and women have to go through. And then to learn that what it is infertility and not knowing what that future will hold. Right? The ambiguity of it all.
Right. And there's so many things that could be going into a diagnosis of infertility and all of that. And maybe I'd like to have you back again to talk about those things, some more of the details about what all of this means. And, so that moms can have and partners and families can have another resource to understand this. But I think the overall story that I'm hearing and that I think other people are understanding is that this is not just like, oh, well, it didn't work out this time. There's a deep and sometimes very unsettling and sometimes very devastating process that occurs after multiple losses sometimes. Yeah. It can be a lot of losses.
Each month that a woman goes through where she's trying to conceive and doesn't, each of those 2-week waiting periods, it's just fraught with anxiety, right? Waiting. Wondering, how soon can I test? How soon can I test? And then you get the positive test and they're still waiting because it's a long way to go from, 2 weeks till 10 months.
Yeah, absolutely. So the things that moms and partners can be looking out for, like you mentioned, depression and anxiety, symptoms of grief, sadness, what are some additionally other things that they could be looking out for? And if they are noticing any of the things that we've talked about, what are some good options for them on how to manage and how to cope? I asked a couple of questions there. So.
Yeah, those are some great questions, Kat. One other emotion that I think is worth talking about is jealousy. It's an emotion that nobody really likes to feel, but it's really common, and it's a common emotion for people experiencing both primary and secondary infertility, which is jealousy. And watching your peers go on to have children, easily or not, to move on to the next stage of their lives while you're still stuck in a place you don't want to be, can really stir up feelings of jealousy. And it's possible to feel happiness for them too, but that jealousy, that underlying piece, it's normal for people experiencing infertility. And it's a hard one.
Oh, I'm so glad you're giving light to this and speaking to this. I have heard this sort of like whispered around, and there's even the shame and guilt about being jealous. It's just like, how much more can we pack on to how bad this feels?
Yeah.
And I'm so glad that you're talking about it and normalizing it. That, of course, like something's happening for somebody else that you are working so hard to get. And that you can have both and feelings. You can be maybe both jealous and be happy for somebody else at the same time.
Yeah.
But that feeling, the jealous feeling, is something to honor. I don't know if that's the right word, to pay attention to give space to.
Yeah. It can feel lonely. That can really further isolate people because you think, oh, I don't want to feel this way. I don't want to put myself in these situations. And I think, you asked about what kind of coping strategies and how to manage some of these experiences. And one of the things I really do like to talk to clients about, and had to take some acknowledgement for my own self, was to not always put yourself in a place where you were really confronted with such challenging, difficult situations all the time. So what I mean by that, it's a little roundabout, but taking some self-care, not feeling like you have to show up to events that are going to put you in a position where you're feeling jealousy and sadness, going to baby showers that maybe you can opt out of, or even dinners with friends where they're talking about their children all the time. You don't have to go to that. You don't have to put yourself in those situations. So taking care of yourself is something that I really spend a lot of time working with clients about, and developing maybe some new habits and new activities that are more fulfilling for this particular time in their life.
Right. So you're saying that really taking stock of how they are feeling right then, maybe in relating to each different invitation they're going, each place they've been invited to go, if they know it's with a group of people who are going to be talking a lot about things that are very painful, for the mom to hear that, to opt out.
To give yourself permission, right?
Yeah.
I also think giving yourself permission to cry and to be angry, and giving permission for your partner to feel and cope differently than you. That's important because we don't all process things the same way. I like to make sure that my clients, and something I really tried to do myself, it was hard, but to send information and to maintain communication with my family and my friends, to let them be a support for me. And sometimes you do wind up in those conversations where people say things that can be hurtful. But sharing information, sharing what is helpful, ultimately the people who are really close and important in your life, that's what they want. They want to find ways to support you. So we can't necessarily change the random person on the street, but those who are near and dear to you, they want to support you. They want to be there.
Right. And they might not know the best way to do that. Like we were talking about in the beginning, that sometimes people say things like, oh, well, at least you have another, or, oh, you were only 3 weeks along. Those people might be coming from a good place, but the execution or how it comes out is not helpful. Right. And that happens, with family members too. So, sometimes when we're in the position of being in pain and then also need to teach other people how to handle it, that can be really hard. But it sounds like with things like you're doing, like developing support groups and helping moms to navigate this, it seems pretty important. And it sounds like therapy and getting that specific support is one way that a mom can manage this.
Yes, that was definitely getting support. A great resource for those around the country is Resolve. There's a link on their page to finding a support group. And so hopefully there's one close to you. And there's lots and lots of support groups online. So those are great ways to connect with other people who are experiencing similar things, going through primary or secondary infertility, like to talk about all of the different options and to really be there for one another. And it's an invaluable resource. And
that's great.
Yeah.
So there's a lot online, and in your local community, you're starting up a group. You're in the process of working on that. And can you talk a little bit more about what you do specifically, what you're going to be doing in the group or in your practice and supporting the moms?
Sure. In my practice, I help women and their partners to really navigate their own process and their own experience through their infertility journey. And so whether that means really analyzing what their next steps are, to navigating the communication with their partner or their family members, really, I just want to be a support for them during this stage. I do help, and one of the other recommendations I have for listeners is to try and develop some kind of relaxation process, meditation. I do a lot of mindfulness with my clients, and that's something that I'll be bringing into the group that I started up. While infertility isn't caused by stress, despite what people may say, it can certainly cause stress. So intentionally learning a relaxation technique may be helpful. We do know that infertile women report higher levels of stress and anxiety than fertile women. And there's some indication that infertile women are more likely to become depressed. And this isn't that surprising considering how far the effects of infertility can reach in people's lives, from work to family, money, sex. Finding ways to reduce stress and tension, anxiety, it can make you feel better. So there's so many ways to decrease stress, like learning relaxation techniques and stress management strategies, but things also like making sure you're eating well and exercising enough, which I know can be tough when you're dealing with infertility because there's lots of different restrictions around exercise, but it's something to be mindful of. And remembering how to be good to yourself, what is helpful and what helps you reduce your stress. These are all things that I like to explore and encourage from people I work with and clients of mine.
Yeah, that's such good stuff. And I hope that, the people who are listening can understand that this is a difficult and, as we said before, sometimes very devastating process. And some people may not be feeling devastated and some people may be, but really understanding that you can have a range of feelings about this and it's all okay. And if you feel like you need support, there are places like Resolve and Rachel and support groups and places to help people understand what's going on, process their feelings about it, get more skills to help manage. And you're giving some really good ones around meditation and breathing and relaxation and exercise and eating. So there are a lot of things that can help cope and get through this period of time. And so it sounds like there are options for mom who are struggling to help them heal and cope and get through this really hard time.
Yes, there are options. And sometimes it's kind of knowing what those options are, which is the biggest challenge, right? If you don't even know you have it, or if you know you have infertility but feel really isolated, it's hard to know where to go to reach out for support. And so I did mention that Resolve, you can find support groups. You can also find individual practitioners, therapists, individual therapists. They also have a network of more physical health practitioners as well. So if you're looking for a reproductive endocrinologist or doctors, you can find them also on the Resolve website.
Great. Thank you so much, Rachel. I'd love to have you back. There's so many other things that we can talk about and get a little bit more in depth to some of the specifics that happen within this period of time. But I think this is a really good overview for moms and family members and providers. Maybe there are some providers out there listening who don't really understand, mental health providers who don't fully understand how infertility can impact a mom. So I'm really hopeful that this conversation will help everyone to go and learn a little bit more and be compassionate with themselves and with the people that they're treating. I thank you so much, Rachel.
Yeah, thank you, Kat. It's so great to be here, and I would love to come back and talk more about these really important issues with you.
We'll do that. So for you guys who are listening, you can go to rachelrabinor.com. And you can also find Rachel on Facebook and Pinterest and Instagram and get lots of supportive information from her there. Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you, Kat.
By joining us today and listening, you're a part of the growing community of people who are aware and concerned for mothers and families during this beautiful and sometimes very difficult time of life. Please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and review this free podcast so that Mom and Mind can be found by moms, families, and providers who will benefit from hearing our talks. If you or someone you know is having a hard time, help is available. Please look for resources for help at momandmind.com, where you will also find links and information from today's episode. Thank you for listening and being a part of the Mom and Mind community.